The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 55.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland.
Okay, so welcome back to Power Factor.
I'm Rick.
I'm Caleb.
I'm Steve. You already know that part. So today we're going to talk about subject of what's kind of defined as local range rules and how it can apply to IDPA and USPSA matches. One of the issues that's kind of come up across the country here recently in terms of safety is the issue of muzzles pointing over the berm, primarily during reloading, but it really can happen during loading or unloading or any other time. And I'm not real up on the IDPA rule book, but as my understanding is that in IDPA you have the concept of safe zones and whatnot, and I guess the thing there is that you can effectively say this top of the berm is a safe zone, just like, you know, the 180s are safe zones or whatever. So why don't you go ahead and expand on that one a little bit?
Well, yes. I mean, what is a safe direction is left up to the discretion of the match organizers.
Right.
The idea that we don't use a 180, we have muzzle safe points, and in general, the muzzle safe points are lateral. You know, it's like, don't let your muzzle go further to the left than the muzzle safe point here, and don't let it go further to the right than the muzzle safe point there.
Or up or down,
But
too.
you could conceivably establish the top of the berm as a muzzle safe point, too, and say your muzzle can't go beyond that. You cannot elevate your muzzle above the berm. And, of course, the rule doesn't prevent anybody from doing it.
Right.
It just penalizes somebody who does. And the way it works now, generally, is you tell people, hey, point the gun at the berm all the time. You know, when you're moving, when you're, transitioning, don't transition like this, don't transition like this, keep the gun pointed at the berm. But it's just, there's no threat of punishment if you don't do that. It's just the idea of it's good to do that. You should try to do that. But, as it is now, we tell people keep the gun pointed at the berm because it's the right thing to do, not keep the gun pointed at the berm because if your muzzle is elevated above the top of the berm, you'll go home.
So what's driving this across the U.S., and I guess apparently more so in the East Coast than on the West Coast, is the fact that you're beginning to see more and more homes encroach on ranges, that a round launched out of a range is very likely to hit a house and or person and do damage or kill somebody. Where out somewhat more in the west coast of the U.S. or the west part of the U.S., you have like a lot of large ranges, or the houses aren't so much encroaching in on residences yet, or as much at this point. So apparently this is more of a problem, from what I understand, than east and west. But let me ask you this question, Rick. Have you been at an IDPA match yet, where somebody's actually imposed a safe zone or a top of the berm restriction? Okay.
No. And I have not shot much. I have not shot really any IDPA outside of the western states. I've shot matches in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and have never had anybody make any reference to muzzle elevation.
Right.
Even mention it. Like, hey, try to keep the muzzle down. I mean, I've never, like in a shooter's meeting or something, I've never heard anybody even reference it at a match.
So, Caleb, you've shot across the U.S. quite a bit.
And I've never had it happen during a match, but at a couple of matches on the East Coast, during load and make ready. And a lot of the controversy stems from reloads, because most of the time when you're shooting and you're running, your gun is level to the berm.
Typically, yeah.
But, most people who have done this for any amount of time, they've learned to reload with the gun oriented, like this. So your muzzle's pointed generally up and over the berm. And I remember at one match, and I won't say what match, but it was in Florida in September, and it was an IDPA match, so that might narrow it down. And during load and make ready, I load the same way.
Some place that would possibly have the name and the location of a cold location.
Yes.
Or a cold intent.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Where they prevent it from being
exactly,
cold.
where it's impossible for it to be
Just can't happen.
that weather condition,
Okay.
because it's in a friggin' swamp. But so I was going to load and make ready, and I pulled my gun out of the holster, and I stuck it up like this, and the safety officer was like, "Don't do that." And I didn't, and I didn't know what he was talking about because I'm like, "Well, what's that?" I thought
You just told me to load, and now you're telling me not to load.
I was like, "Did I forget to put my cover garment on, or what's going on?" He's like, "Don't point your muzzle over the berm." And I kind of looked at him, and I'm like, "Okay." And, I loaded it like that, and it felt awkward, and I put the gun back in the holster, and then I went through the course of fire where I had to do 2 reloads, and I reloaded with my muzzle like this and didn't say anything. So,
you didn't get a muzzle warning?
No, I didn't get a muzzle warning or anything like that. Now, this particular range does have really low berms.
Okay.
I've shot a couple of matches there now, and they have very low berms, but it's also in the middle of 100 miles of swamp.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, and then what was the situation in terms of housing around there? Is it really close, or is it?
No, there's nothing for, you have to drive 15 minutes before you see another house.
So there really was, generally speaking, if you put something over the berm, the likelihood of doing damage maybe to an alligator.
Yeah, exactly.
But
yeah, and then I was at a match in Tennessee, and there was one bay where I was at a match in Oregon, a rifle match, and there was one bay where they're like, when you're reloading, try to keep your muzzle down, because if it goes up, there's, houses up there. So.
Right.
But you weren't threatened with DQ if your muzzle did go up.
Right, they didn't, they said, make sure you try to keep your muzzle down, we'll try to warn you if it gets out of control.
So that is the penalty, though. You were saying, Rick, before about that, I don't recall exactly what you said, but it sounded like you were implying that there was really no penalty other than just telling you not to do it. But I think it sounds like you're saying that there is a penalty, and it's called a DQ if they want to call you on it.
In IDPA, if they wanted to, they could establish a muzzle safe point.
They could say, here's your muzzle safe point.
So make it a box instead of a cone or whatever. And say, you not only can't expand beyond this,
that would be a nightmare to enforce.
Well, I think that's part of the issue in terms of now you're looking at, unless you can do the calculation in your head really fast, and again, it's subjective, but distance to the berm, height of the berm, angle of the gun, there's a lot of variables there.
Height of the shooter comes into
effect.
Exactly,
it does, yeah. So how are you going to end up calling that and know that you've actually called an honest, unless it was like this, yes, it's pretty obvious.
Right. If I'm putting my gun straight up in the air.
Yeah, right.
But some people do reload like that.
Yeah.
True.
But then what about the guy,
reload.
the further you rotate it, the more vertical it is.
Right.
And so if we're going to start measuring the angle,
exactly.
in the middle of a stage, especially like a USPSA course of fire where somebody single stack reloads 5 times.
Yeah.
And somebody shooting open could shoot the whole match and never reload.
Right.
The guy, certain people are being exposed to that rule to a much greater extent than others. But still, if you're every time somebody reloads, but then again, like in IDPA, you're making multiple judgment calls on every shooter on every stage.
That's true.
And that's not so much part of USPSA. The idea that you're judging, is the guy leaning out too far or not, or is his foot in or is his foot out? You don't have that many, those types of calls in USPSA to the extent you do in IDPA. And I think in IDPA, the shooters accept the idea that safety officers kind of have their future in their hand. It's like
that doesn't mean they like it.
Well, no, but you have to accept it. That's part of the
absolutely.
game. Whereas in USPSA, I think the shooters are much more against the idea that the safety officer is like the referee in a boxing match who can influence the outcome of the match. The range officer is just supposed to be really kind of monitoring the events, but not kind of insinuating himself into the events to the extent that the safety officer does in IDPA.
So the primary difference between USPSA and IDPA with respect to this is that USPSA specifically has a rule that says there are no local range rules.
Right.
Clubs cannot say, at our club, you can't do this. At our club, you can't point the muzzle over the berm or we're going to DQ. That is not allowed.
Right.
And still call it a USPSA match. So the issue is for those clubs is that if they still want to hold these types of matches, they can't call them USPSA matches. They can't be sanctioned matches. And a lot of shooters, it's a big deal. They want to go shoot a match. They want to shoot a USPSA match. They want to shoot class fires, whatever the case may be. And now you've kind of got a problem of these clubs, and there really is no way around it other than asking for a waiver from, in this case, a regional director who is the president of USPSA, who's now Phil Strader. Strader, right? Yeah.
Now, didn't we have? In our area, didn't we have a local club that did ask for some kind of a?
They did ask for it, and
were
denied.
No. Yeah.
But what was there? Theirs wasn't. It was double tapping steel.
Well,
or something,
that's the second discussion, or part of it is that one club asked for the muzzle over the berm.
Okay.
And what happens is that they go to typically the area director, and the area director will say, I'll ask the president, and it immediately comes back no, and they're asking the president for an exception for that club.
Right.
And they get an answer, no, you can't do that.
Right.
So another club came out with a rule saying that you can't double tap pepper poppers or steel or anything like that.
Because the second round
The
might
idea
skip.
is that as you hit the first one and the popper's falling, the second round will hit it and it'll act as a launch ramp to launch the thing out. Some interesting information about that. There is a website, I think, called Savage Range Systems, and they have a really good tutorial on their site. They make steel targets, and they have a tutorial on their website about basically safe distances, setting up targets, and it's literally talking about splatter zones and this, that, and the other thing. But they have a section there on the Colt poppers, or whatever they call them, and pepper poppers.
Oh, those old Colt speed steel poppers.
Exactly. And the point they made on that is that if you hit it when it's at greater than 30 degrees falling, or at 750 feet per second, so it's got to be both, the bullet will literally fragment upon hitting the popper. It's only if you're going less than 750 feet per second, or the thing's falling greater than 30, that it turns into a launch ramp for the bullet.
Now, does that have both of those? So greater than 30 degrees and 700, less than 750?
So the thing is, if it's vertical, if you have a vertical popper and you hit it like 500 feet per second, the bullet will not defragment. Okay? And they said it obviously depends to a certain degree on bullets of how thick the jackets are and whatnot. But the point being is that, most of our bullets are going well over 750. And
okay.
Even
230 grain major 45 is going like 768 or something like that at the muzzle.
Yeah, but okay, so it's close.
It's close,
right? So it may not completely defragment.
But I've also never seen someone double tap a popper with a 45.
Yeah.
You don't want to use the roundup. I mean, that from my
I'm out of
perspective.
bullets.
That's true.
If you
That's
double
true.
tap all the steel,
That's
you're
true.
going to
You
do
don't
an
have
extra
all the
reload.
ammo capacity
Yeah.
to somebody
Yeah.
unlimited or whatever. But the point being is that it's not as bad as what a lot of people think it is. And if you know this information in advance of the 30-degree angle, you can set your poppers relative to your berm out or close to it, such that if it does go 30, that you can calculate the angle and have it.
Well, you could
that it's gonna
also
go into
set
the
it
berm.
so that it never drops that far, right?
No, because
That's gotta go. Well, 30
you
is
really
like
want
that.
to go down. Yeah, 30 is fairly flat. But the
Right.
point being is that this is a range setup issue, and you can easily take these poppers and spin them around, and rather than being backwards or
Forward falling poppers.
forward falling poppers, and
I
nothing
hate 'em.
screws shooters up more than
Oh,
anything.
man.
Is a forward falling popper where you hit it and it goes ping, and it basically comes back, and then
It laughs at you.
and then starts coming forward. Of course, you don't realize that, so you shoot it again and set it back up
Right.
until you actually realize you are hitting the thing.
I have double tapped a forward falling popper with
I've
a
done it.
45.
Yeah, I've done
Well,
it.
as an activator, a forward falling popper is better anyway because it's pulling in the same direction that you
As
want the cable to go.
cable, yeah,
you don't
just-
have to have so many pulleys and stuff
Right.
to change a falling this way into a this way motion.
There you go. There's your solution. All
there you go.
forward falling
Forward falling
poppers everywhere.
And that is what
Next
happened
topic.
for this particular club,
Yeah.
who was looking for an exception or a waiver, saying that we want to DQ people for double tapping steel. And again, that's a local range rule. And USPSA came back and said, no, we will not grant that waiver. This can be solved by basically course construction. So what that club has done is all these type of targets where it's a speed thing. I mean, and typically where you're doing this is an activator. It's an activator for some sort of a drop falling target or whatever. And they want to hit that thing and get onto the swinger or whatever it is as fast as possible. Because if it's just a simple popper sitting out there and you hit it, I mean, if it falls 10 minutes later, you don't care as long as it falls. So their solution has been to make all of their steel, especially where it's critical like that, forward falling poppers. Problem solved.
Right.
But they were trying to look for a waiver around that, and the solution was a very simple one. Now, the point I was going to make about this whole entire thing about muzzles over the berm and whatnot is that we all know guns don't go off by themselves. I mean, you can point a muzzle over the berm, and as long as your finger's out of the trigger guard, it's not going to go off. So the solution a lot of these guys wanted to put in place is they want to train shooters to keep their muzzle down, which is literally saying, we don't care if you AD, as long as you AD into the berm, we're okay with ADs, which to me is the wrong thinking.
Right.
Or they accept that people are going to AD, and so let's minimize the damage when it happens.
Here's a question. I mean, you've shot, a jillion matches, and I've shot a half a jillion. You've probably shot a jillion.
2/3 of a jillion.
And how many ADs have you actually seen or been at matches where they've happened?
Probably a dozen.
Yeah, probably somewhere in there.
Okay, yeah,
I've
I've got about 4 over my lifetime so far.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, when you think about that, if you spread that out over the number of matches that we've shot,
It's very rare.
It's an extremely rare
But
occurrence,
unfortunately,
and
it
it's
only takes
already
one.
a DQ. But that's the thing. But it's already a DQ.
Right.
It's kind of like, I mean, you can backtrack it to a lot of the political stuff. It's like murdering someone's already illegal. What are we going to do? Make it illegaler?
Right. Yeah.
Right, and that's true. That's true. But I think from the club's perspective, though,
Right. The club doesn't care it's a DQ. They care.
they want the club to stay open.
Exactly.
Is that the people who are making these rules, who are the club officers, typically don't know a whole lot about what causes an AD to happen. I mean, they just automatically think that if a gun's pointed over the berm, all of a sudden it's dangerous.
And yet these clubs have skeet ranges.
Well, that's a different story.
I'm just saying.
But the thing is that they want to put some rule into effect so they feel they can, do something to make it look like they're proactive of trying to have a safe range environment, especially for their neighbors. And if something does happen, they can say, well, we've got this safety thing, which I don't really think that's going to, I mean, after the round's been launched out of the range, whether they have a policy or not, I think is irrelevant. But my thought is that since we can't have local rules and still call it a USPSA match, the club wants something to set up in place. The USPSA wants something so they can have a match. And my thought is the club comes up with a rule and says, you can't have your muzzle pointed over the berm with your finger in the trigger guard. They're happy because they've got their muzzle pointed over the berm. The USPSA is happy because they've got finger in the trigger guard, which is already a DQable offense.
Right.
So basically, everybody's happy. The club has what they want. USPSA have what
that rule is
they're still running a
essentially
match.
that rule is already in effect because it's already against the rules to have your finger in the
reload.
trigger
But the thing
guard.
is that all of a sudden shooters are now going to be more aware of muzzle over the berm because they've been told, they're going to be being told 2 things now: muzzle over the berm, finger in the trigger guard. So they're probably going to be on the lookout for both of them so much rather than just finger in the trigger guard, because I'll admit, and you'll probably seen it too, finger in the trigger guard is a DQable offense. I've seen it, you've seen it, and a lot of people don't get called on it when they should. And you have an interesting story about Canada with respect to that.
A buddy of mine who shoots up in British Columbia said the most common reason for a match DQ in the matches he shot in BC is finger on the trigger, in the trigger guard. And in the United States in 15 years, I've never seen anybody DQ'd for that.
I think I didn't see it, but since I was tracking the DQs for the section for the last quite a few years, there was one instance out of I don't know how many DQs that somebody was actually called on it, and I think they were called on it because they were initially given a warning, and they did it again and got nailed.
I saw one under those same circumstances in an IDPA match, and they had an AD later, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And typically
Bad
that's
day.
what it's finger in the trigger guard. Eventually it's going to catch up to you, and you're going to do it at some point. So
Yes, you will.
yeah. So speaking of IPSC, IPSC rules with respect to this is a little bit different than USPSA. USPSA rules for unsafe gun handling with respect to the 180, or actually 90, literally states the 90, perpendicular to the back of the berm and so on and so forth. IPSC's wording of that particular rule, and I think it's, and don't hold me to this, but I'm going to throw out 10.5.3, and I don't know why that number rings a bell, but at any rate, you can go look it up.
Could be 10.5.2.
It might be, actually.
4.
Yeah. IPSC rules don't state 90 degrees. They literally do like IDPA, where they say where the muzzle is deemed to be, unsafe.
Muzzle safe points.
So yeah, they don't call them muzzle safe points, but it's kind of like they leave it open to what they can define. So they can define the top of the berm being exceeding that as being a DQable offense. And I know a couple of years ago there was a world shoot. Thought it was the Philippines. I could be wrong, but at any rate, where they literally stated, being that it's an IPSC World Championship and it's running under IPSC rules, that any muzzles going over the top of the berm would be a DQable offense. But
at that time, I think it was specific to that match.
No, they couldn't do that.
Well, that's where I'm going with it.
No, the IPSC rules also state that you can't have local rules, and if you do, the regional directorate has to be consulted about giving it a waiver. They can't come up with local rules either.
Okay.
Yeah, but what they did have
Is this match, if it's the same match I'm thinking of, it wasn't a couple years ago, it was 10 or 12 years ago.
It was quite a few years ago.
Okay.
The Philippine Championship would probably be, I'm guessing, like 5 or 6, isn't it? Maybe more than that.
Bally was 200005, so it would have been before
so there's
that.
6
yeah.
years. 6 or 7 years now. 7 years this year, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they do have the rule in there where they can state the top of the berm is...
But we were up 6 or 8 years ago, we were using the same rule book as IPSC was, weren't we?
No, well, okay, so in 2004, we were using the same rule book. And then USPSA started splitting, and we came up with our own official rule book in 2008. And I think they came out with their own version in 2006. So what year did you say Bally was?
Bally was 05, I think.
Okay, I might be off by a year or whatever, but it's around roughly that time frame. And I actually have...
So it must have been after the split.
Yes.
If their rule book said you can't point it over the berm at the time the match was
because up until that point, they had the common rule book, which it had like the U.S. rule 10 point, and so on. So it had the IPSC version and the U.S. version in the same rule book. When we split, they went their way, and they had their own rule book, and we had ours. Their wording... I'm sorry, we have never had a rule book that both of us were running under where it had theirs allowing them to point it over the berm and where we couldn't. It's when we came out with ours, we stated 90 degrees, and then they, probably because they saw the handwriting on the wall with respect to this, and said we need to add this because we're going to start losing the ability to hold sanctioned matches at certain locations if we don't put some sort of provision there for making...
We have to take the heads off our targets.
Yeah.
Hey, I like those turtle targets. Those are fun to shoot.
A lot of people have suggested in terms of the U.S. that maybe we should adopt the IPSC rule with respect to this. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's another
I mean,
story
maybe it's
someday.
going to be forced on us whether we like it or not.
Well, I mean, really...
Especially if clubs start dropping out.
Well, yeah. I mean, if clubs start... I mean, I used to be a member of a club that was closed for a year because of a round that left the range and allegedly hit a business park that was for some reason built right at the end of the rifle range.
Not in an IDPA
when there's nothing for like 5 blocks in either direction. But anyway, and the club was closed for a year, and the modifications to the range and the changes in the range rules that they were required to go through to reopen essentially prevented them from hosting any kind of practical matches. They used to have IDPA and USPSA there, and now they have neither because they have had to institute various rules. And any range in our area that had a situation like that where the same, I'm not going to name names, but if they had the same law enforcement agency looking over their shoulder, I'm sure they would have to come up with those same kind of changes. Yeah. So if any of the clubs that we shoot at now has a round leave the range, there's a stink made about it, and rightly so. If somebody's got a bullet through their front window, we're going to start losing USPSA and IDPA affiliated clubs,
right?
Because I mean, even the range that I shoot at most often, there's a house probably. I mean, I don't know how deep the woods are, maybe 200 yards from the back berm of half of the pistol bays.
Yeah.
And
on the flip side, if you buy a house near a gun range that was there before you moved in, and you piss and moan about the gun range, you're kind of an a-hole.
Well, if you piss and moan about the noise, that's one thing. If you piss and moan about the hole in your dog, I think that
depends on the dog.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think you have an expectation, even if you accept the noise, that there's not going to be bullets flying through your windows.
I wonder how many of these clubs give actually honorary memberships to their neighbors. Just that's a different subject.
I mean, a lot of clubs
it'd be smart if they did.
A lot of clubs.
There you go.
People that move near the range maybe intentionally move near the range. They want to be near a shooting range, you know.
Right.
And so it's not a matter of neighbors always being bad neighbors.
Yeah.
But I mean, we had an issue at our again, the club where I shoot now most frequently. A person shows up on the news, and the local news crews, they're in their backyard.
Oh, yeah.
They had a bullet that landed in their yard. Well, it wasn't a bullet, it was a cartridge.
Yeah.
And they were just sure it had come from the local range. And I'm like going, what, the guy threw it over the fence or what?
Somebody tossed it out the window of their car.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like going, and so you've got the stupid, I won't say stupid, the uninformed neighbor, the gullible news people combining to make, a tempest out of it.
It's
in a teapot.
Yeah.
One of the points that you made there is that at the club that I shoot at, during the shooters meeting, they will literally say that, you as the shooters are liable for any rounds that leave this range. If it can be tracked back to you and we can do it and there's damages, we're going to be knocking on your door. Now, whether that really can be done or not, I don't know because I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV either. But it is a threat.
You just go on YouTube, watch the video.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
from an insurance standpoint, they could actually the insurance agency could actually come after you to collect damage for that.
Well, the trick is probably coming after you, because how are
Right.
they going to know? I mean, unless somebody videotaped it at exactly, they have the timestamp on their camera at 2:11, and then everybody goes, my house was hit at 2:12 or 2:11 or whatever, and they go, this
2:11
guy's
and
shooting,
38
and
seconds.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, I guess we got it, but I mean, that chances that
okay,
happening.
but I mean, I don't think that's as ridiculous as it sounds. If you've got, let's say, a video on YouTube, some guy shows rounds goes over the berm. What kind of a gun were you shooting? What kind of ammo did you have? Oh, Montana Gold 230s. What kind of bullet was in your front porch? Oh, Montana Gold 230s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as impossible as it sounds.
So, pro tip here from us: if you have an AD and it leaves the range, probably don't post that video on YouTube. Just
Make
saying.
sure your buddies don't post it either.
Yeah, let's try to keep that on the DL.
Yeah, and that's one of the unfortunate things, is things I've seen on videos on YouTube.
Oh, man.
Is things that are clearly decubable offenses, and they still get posted. So, and nobody calls it. So.
Well, sometimes, like, our awesome producer gets DQ'd and posts it as an object lesson for people to learn about not wearing Band-Aids.
But I mean, there are. Okay, so I don't want to deviate here too far, but
Oh, this is fun.
But yeah, it's a subject near and dear to somebody's heart.
And I'm often accused of being a deviant, so.
But I mean, it can be a learning situation in videos. I mean, we had a stage that I saw where somebody facing up range start, and the guy was it was 3 shooters, fairly hotshot shooters, were trying to basically get out of the shooting box as fast as possible. And the RO in that situation, because they know they're going up range, is trying to get the hell out of the way as fast as possible. When you go back and look at the videos frame by frame, and you can see a lot of people were pulling their guns before they completed the turn. And in one case, a gun was pointed literally at the RO's foot, who was at least 5 or 6 feet up range.
Right.
And the guy who did it saw it and recognized it and says, now I didn't realize I did that at the time, but now that I can see that, I need to really work on my technique or whatever. Well, if nobody had seen the video, he wouldn't have known. Nobody would have known anything, and the guy may have gone continuing down the road, pulling his gun, pointing it up range, whatever, until somebody actually did see it.
It's just like game film. I mean, athletes watch game film,
right?
And I do
use
the
it
same.
as a learning.
I do the same thing when I shoot. If I shoot a major, I want to watch what I'm doing and see. It's like, oh man, my setup into that position was crap. My footwork was terrible. Things like that. So there's a practical benefit to it, at least in my opinion. And also in an object lesson. But I think. More what you're talking about is the videos that get on YouTube of people doing matches where they do something, that's just mind-boggling, and you go, how did you not get DQ'd for that?
Yeah. We saw a situation where somebody fell, and the gun clearly went up range, and he popped back up and continued shooting. Naro didn't see it, apparently.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing this is kind of a complete shift here in terms of discussion. For those of you who are shooting production division,
USPSA production.
USPSA. Well, there's only one production division.
Well, there's
There's
exit
16
production,
matches in the U.S.
and there's Bianchi Cup production division, but that one already has what we're talking about.
Okay, does it really?
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
we'll talk about that.
So, USPSA Board of Directors, I think in December or whatever, had a Board of Directors meeting, and they reviewed some of the rules.
The old Board of Directors, mind you.
The old, yes.
The outgoing.
And they made some changes to a couple of the division rules. For production and single stack, they have now outlawed the use of a magnet.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. On your belt to retain magazines in production and single stack. Now, I don't know if they've changed the wording of the rule entirely with respect to, magazine retention devices. My guess is they probably haven't. So the fact that they have specifically outlawed them for production and single stack must mean that they're legal for limited 10, and open. Right. Even though I don't agree with the whole entire premise of a magnetic field retaining the magazine and whatnot, but at any rate, that's a different story. So
it's like the Force holding your magazine there.
Yeah. And the same thing, double back sticky tape would do the same thing too for a certain period of time.
But then it'd be hard to load.
You just, Velcro, cram Velcro up your magazine. Well, the other issue, and that's not that big of a thing really for a lot of people.
But Steve told you so.
But now you know, yeah. But the other thing that is going to be possibly a big deal for a lot of people is that they have now initiated a 3-pound trigger pull limit in production, which means your trigger pull cannot be any less than 3 pounds.
Initial trigger pull.
Right.
Because there's so many people with DASA guns.
In our area, I mean, you've
Well,
got
no, the CZ is pretty popular
We've got
up here,
a bunch
yeah.
of SIG fanboys in our area, so
That
there's
is true.
quite a few
Yeah.
guys that are shooting those.
Well, now I gotta ask. I mean, I don't do much to the triggers on my Glocks. You know,
I don't
I'll
do a
put
lot
in
either,
I'll put
but
in
yeah.
a 3.5 pound connector, or they call it a 4.5 pound connector now.
A 3.5 pound connector makes a 4 pound trigger,
Right.
4.5 quarter.
So,
yeah.
you know, all of my, and I'll put in the New York reset. So all of my
will bump it up.
competition triggers are about 4.5 pounds
Yeah.
with that connector in them. How many people are actually running a sub 3 pound trigger in USPSA
if you
production?
read Brian Enos' form,
Everybody!
just about
Holy
everyone
crap!
is, yeah.
Appears to
Oh
be
my
Brian
god!
Enos.
Yeah.
I did see that. Yeah.
So
But
what's
that was
going to happen?
that was my initial question too. Is
Yeah.
how much of a change is it really?
I don't know.
To establish a 3 pound.
we know a lot
weight?
of production shooters, fairly hotshot production shooters around here. Of course, like you pointed out, a lot of them are shooting DASAs, so I don't know if it's going to affect them. But for people who are shooting XDs, M&Ps, Glocks, and whatnot that have gone out there and bought aftermarket trigger component groups, if they're under 3 pounds, that's going to be illegal. And for those people who are making these things like the Bannock trigger or
The
Springer
Ghost
trigger,
or the rocket triggers.
exactly.
But
all
can't
that
those guys now make all that money back by charging $25 for
To
the
take
little
the part
spring?
back out?
The
Yeah.
little spring
Yeah.
that'll bump it back
Now
up
it's a
over
4.5
3
pound
pounds?
trigger. Good job,
So
guys.
the intent obviously behind all of this is that when production came out, the intent was to make it a low cost. I'm not going to call it an entry division because that makes it sound like it's only for people who are
Beginners.
beginning shooters, and they're
But
clearly
that was
not
the,
beginning
that
shooters.
was the point.
But they
A
wanted to
large
make
part
it
of the
a
reason for it.
low-cost division so that people could get into USPSA without spending a pile of money. The infamous, you have to have $3,000 to buy a gun in USPSA. You don't. So they clearly wanted to make a division where it was obviously you didn't have to do that. The problem is the way they set the rules up, people being the way they are, they want to race, they start trying to dissect the guns and replace as many parts as they can.
Lightweight
to get
strikers.
springs, all of it. Trigger group parts, everything, to try to make their gun more racy or more competitive. So unfortunately, the horse is out of the barn a long time ago. IPSC, the world body, has taken a different approach against this, and they literally say you cannot replace any part in the gun unless it's OEM. And in fact, they have a minimum trigger pull, 5 pounds?
5 pounds for your initial trigger
Yeah,
pull,
yeah.
which is why the Shadow rules IPSC production, because they'll have they'll get guys who they won't replace any of the parts, but they'll do an action job on it, and so you'll have a 5 pound initial trigger pull with an OEM hammer to make sure everything, or hammer spring to make sure everything goes bang, and then your single action pull is 1.5 pounds, but it's still legal for IPSC production.
Yeah. So, at any rate, for those of you who are out there
Buy CZs.
who don't pay attention to the rule announcements and whatnot, this rule will actually go into effect the end of 2013. So you've got a year. However, I will say this. This rule was voted on and put into place by quite a few outgoing area directors and one noted outgoing USPSA president. If you're not really happy about this, my recommendation to you would be to contact your area director and voice your displeasure about that, because there's 12 months between now and then that possibly they can override this and turn it around and whatever. So from my standpoint, it really doesn't mean a whole lot because of my Glock 19. When I'm playing in production, which is what I'm shooting, I've got it's set up for carry, so I'm not doing any fancy stuff with it anyway. It doesn't apply to me, but from what I understand, a lot of people who are out there, or quite a few people that are out there, this will affect them. It may affect you.
More than 10.
Yeah.
All the people on the
Really,
Brian Enos
really
forum,
vocal.
really.
10 really vocal
they're mad,
people.
Man, they're mad as hell. I was reading that thread.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting when I saw that rule. I've never actually read the USPSA rulebook cover to cover because, God. But Bianchi Cup, which is a sport that I shoot a lot, their production division has always had a minimum 3.5 pound trigger pull rule. So a production. So, and what we've seen in the first 3 years of Bianchi Cup production was guys would come in from USPSA and they actually do a thorough equipment check. They weigh the triggers on every gun at Bianchi and everything. And guys, it would. The 3.5 pound weight would cause their gun to go off, and so they would be like, and you'd see guys swapping in parts and stuff like that.
Springs.
Have they ever had any huge issues with conducting those tests?
No. If for at a major match, so how the equipment check goes at Bianchi Cup is they open up registration 2 days in advance of first shot the first shot going down range. And so you go and you pick up your bag, you have your gun with you. There's at the table there's a line of refs. You take it to the first ref, you hand it to him, you write all the information for the gun on a card, he hands it to the next ref who weighs it, who hands it to the next ref who uses a trigger pull dingus, which is a free weight, and then it has a little round, it's like a, I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like if you could make a cylinder into a U shape.
Okay.
And then that goes in the trigger, and then they point the gun vertical, and then they just go like that, and the weights drop in.
It kind of finds the center point of
the
trigger.
The Glock, I mean, if you pull it by the tip, it's going to be a lot lighter than if you pull it by the pivot.
Right. This actually applies, it's about the same width as my index finger.
All right.
So
and
it
are they required to
pressure.
hold the muzzle vertical as they lift it?
You know, I honestly
it
don't
seems
remember.
Like that little roller, because I mean, like Glocks, especially the trigger, has a pretty exaggerated slope. And so if the gun is pointed straight up, that pivot point's going to it's going to roll up nearer the pivot point, you would think. Whereas some other guns that have a more of a symmetrical trigger, it's going to stay down in the center of that, and effectively a lighter pull weight is going to be legal, I would think.
You know, I don't actually know, because I remember when they tested my XD, it was fine.
I mean, that's why I asked if they have any problems, because one of the arguments against the rule is, it's just opening this can of worms of being unable to consistently test pull weights. And I'm going, well, they've been doing it at IPSC, and if they've been doing it at the Yankee Cup for years and years and years, clearly it's not causing a lot of trouble. Right. Otherwise, we would have heard about it.
Well, one of the issues they were pointing out is that you are having people point their guns literally straight up, and you're sitting there going, well...
Over the berm.
Yeah, over the berm, right.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's the same thing as like, okay, so the 180 is illegal, whether it's an unloaded gun or whatever, anywhere, but now we're going to do trigger pulls, and 180s are okay.
Right.
Yeah.
It is unloaded, right?
So one of the other changes that was noted also is that in limited and limited 10, there used to be a minimum production quantity that had to be met before the gun would be legal to shoot, as deemed by the USPSA, which I think that number was 500, and that's been tossed out now. So it sounds like
really
literally
difficult to enforce.
Yeah. Literally, I mean, the manufacturer would say, okay, we've actually hit the number now, and let USPSA know, and then the USPSA would say, okay, this is now legal for...
So it's like a rubber stamp anyway.
To a certain degree. I mean, before it was like a site tracker or whatever from SVI. They had to manufacture so many slides and then tell USPSA that they could do it. Of course, SV's production rate probably took them 2 years to manufacture. That's a different story.
I would think,
Well, but then you get into stuff like the Lone Wolf frame that I have for my Glock, right?
Yeah.
So they've manufactured 1 billion Glocks.
Right.
So, and it's just is it a replacement part? Is it a gun? You know, so I can see why they would ditch that.
So they ditched it. But the other thing they also ditched was one of the rule numbers or rule required that the barrel had to be the same length and configuration as stock. That got ditched, which now I think, since they're saying prototype guns are okay and limited, if you want to come out with like this weird extended muzzle pistol or whatever,
finally
sounds
my
like you can
8-inch
do it.
1911 is ready for competition.
And the other half of that used to be that you could not add any external weight devices or gas pedals, and the gas pedals are like in open, you'll see it, and people will stick like this little thumb rest thing on the side of the gun or whatever. So those were illegal. Now the rule says nothing about those. So it sounds like you can add external weight and gas pedals to your limited 10.
Style pre-compensator muzzle weights, it was just like essentially a slug of metal that surrounded the part of the barrel that extended out beyond the end of the slide.
Sounds like it's
That's now legal.
Cool, and you can mill a cut into that and put your sight on it.
By virtue of the fact that it says nothing in the rules now about external weights or a quantity of 500 being produced, I would say it sounds like, yes, that's now legal.
I'm going to build a Glock.
I've never heard anybody express any interest in adding muzzle weights in limited, since that was one of the defining features that separated limited from open. I've never heard anybody argue, let's make limited more like open, yet they've now introduced or gotten rid of two rules
I don't know.
that maintain that separation.
On the other hand, maybe it was an oversight when USPSA posted and went, whoops, we forgot to put these two things in the... Because they posted literally the new rules for limited and limited 10. And I'll admit 21 and 22, which are the two things that have been removed of the very last two that were on the table. Maybe somebody posted,
somebody forgot to put the last page of the document.
Exactly. So
crap.
All of a sudden, USPSA may come out and go, "Oh, we didn't mean that." Who knows?
Right.
But at any rate.
Okay.
Well,
anything else?
Stop complaining about your trigger weights.
So, stage design.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things that we got into a little bit in our Double Tap Championship match review was dissecting stages, and we're going to discuss in future episodes course design, both in IDPA and USPSA, and we thought we would invite viewers to send us your course designs, and we'll
rip them apart.
Yeah. No, we'll be gentle. Well,
Yeah.
I'll be gentle.
Yeah,
I can't speak for
you'll regret
Rick.
you'd ever send it by the time we're done with it. No, but seriously, if you have a course design, a lot of people, I mean, I think they'll tell me, hey, I've got an idea for a course design, and I'll say, well, write it down, put it in kind of like the format of a stage with a written procedure, and as soon as I kind of put that caveat on that's a great idea,
no one wants to do it.
And I think to a certain extent they're kind of intimidated by the idea that they have an idea, but they don't necessarily know which aspects of the idea are legal or illegal, which are practical or impractical,
right,
which introduce too much inequity across the divisions and whatnot, which is a concern we have in IDPA that some clubs don't necessarily have. But anyway,
so what's 6-round neutral?
Yeah, exactly. and so anyway, if the viewers want us to critique a course of fire either publicly on the show, which would be the most fun, or even privately, go ahead and send it to us. I've been designing courses of fire for 15 years. Some of them have actually been appeared in matches. So go ahead and send them in, and we'll run them through the ringer.
And a good point there is that for those of you who are ROs who are thinking of possibly becoming a CRO, the whole entire CRO course is course design. I mean, that's really what it gets down to. And part of the program is submitting original course designs for critique. In this case, they go to your mentor who's teaching you the class or teaching the course. But if you ever do a level 2 match, and we talked about this before when I did level 2 Northwest section, what was that match?
Was it Northwest Challenge?
Yeah, Northwest Challenge. Thank you.
Yes.
Is that I had to submit all the stages to John Amadon, who's the VP of USPSA, for approval. So we can play John Amadon in your case there, and you can submit it to us. And
but we're prettier.
And, yeah.
Sorry, John.
And we shoot more.
I'm not touching that wood.
So, at any rate,
powerfactorshow@gmail.com. If you've got a course you'd like us to
just
send,
send it out.
if you've already built it and took video of it and you want to send that with it too, that's great because that just gives us more stuff
actually
to look at.
A drawing and a video.
Yeah, that would be the best.
Yeah, you can see it being shot.
Because one of the things that I think you guys have experienced this is you'll get the match book for a major and you'll look at the drawings and you'll be like,
this isn't the same thing.
And then you'll go and you'll actually walk the stage and be like, what the crap is, I don't see, and then, but then, that happens all the time.
There's only 11 targets here.
Right.
Where's the third target? Yeah. So if you've got the course design, send us that. If you've got course design and a video of actual human beings shooting it, please send us that and we'll take a look at it. And it's powerfactorshow@gmail.com.
Okay, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Adios.